Columbia is not my hometown, but it feels like my hometown. I lived in Columbia for 16 years. A lot happened during those years for me. And so it's good to be back home, primarily because of this congregation. This morning, I'd like to talk about my definition of spirituality. But before doing so, I should say to any visitors or new members who might be here this morning that when Unitarian ministers speak, they're not speaking on behalf of Unitarian Universalism or the denomination or even the congregation. Every member of a Unitarian congregation can think and speak for themselves. As a minister, just like any other person here, I'm sharing with you my understanding and my perspective based on my experience and education. In a UU congregation, we learn from each other. And this minister is as much a student as a teacher. And so my understanding of spirituality, like my understanding of anything, is not definitive because I'm speaking for myself. Though my perspective may very well represent one of a great variety of perspectives that you'll find in this congregation, which in my mind is the brilliance of Unitarian Universalism. And of course, neither is my understanding final, for I suspect that my understanding will very likely change as I hopefully continue to learn and grow. It's become popular in our time for many people to claim that they are spiritual but not religious. What does that mean? Well, at one time, being spiritual and being religious were synonymous, but spiritual and religious are getting divorced from each other as more and more Americans identify as religiously non-affiliated, the famous nuns, who now represent a quarter of all Americans and a third of those under 30. I define spirituality as our capacity to connect with that which is greater than ourselves. Now, the more traditionally religious among us might use the word God to describe that something greater, whereas we humanist types prefer words such as humanity, life, or the universe. Spirituality is the largest perspective by which we understand ourselves, others, our world, and life. And this transcendent connection gives us a sense of meaning and purpose, as well as a context for developing our values and ethics. Now, some people's sense of the transcendent is large as all of humanity, all living beings, the planet, the universe, or life itself. While some people's sense of transcendence does not extend very far beyond themselves, perhaps no further than their own family or their ethnic group, their religion, their nation. In my understanding, spirituality is innate and universal. Everyone is born with the capacity for self-transcendence, a capacity that is refracted through one's religion, culture, gender, ethnicity, family dynamics, personality, and life experiences, which explains the great variety of spiritual experiences and expressions across humanity. Spirituality is a slippery term because it's extremely subjective and personal. In fact, our spirituality may be the most personal thing about us. When we refer to a person's spirit or soul, we're referring to the essence of who a person is, the core of his or her being. Spirit means breath. The Bible portrays God as bringing Adam to life by breathing into him. Like our breathing, our spirituality animates our lives by centering, organizing, and defining who we are. Now, religion is a group's organized expression of spirituality with the trappings of history and tradition, beliefs and doctrines, rituals and ceremonies, sacred writings, and ecclesiastical authorities. Spirituality is deeper and broader than any particular religious tradition. Just as a bucket of seawater can give us a taste of the ocean, but cannot contain the ocean, no religion can express all of spirituality. And any religion which claims to be the only way, the truth, is being presumptuous and arrogant, in my opinion. That's why I appreciate Unitarian Universalism's embrace of all religious, philosophical, and spiritual paths, as audacious as that attempt may be. Now, I realize that some of us humanist types are squeamish about the word spiritual, but none of us should be afraid of the word, because it's not about divinity, but humanity, your humanity and mine. It's about fulfilling our capacity to be human. The traditional use of the word salvation implies that something needs to be imparted to us from beyond our human nature. Now, as many of you remember about me, I'm interested in the original meaning of words. And the word salvation shares the same root as the word salve, an ointment that brings health and wholeness. Our salvation does not require any additives. Everything necessary for our growth and development into whole human beings is implanted within us. The seeds of our humanity are like seeds in the ground. The potential needs only the right conditions for growth to occur. So what are some of these capacities with which we are born and which, if developed, would enable us to get beyond ourselves? Well, I'd like to suggest just 8 this morning. It's by no means an exhaustive list, but I believe it to be an essential list of what it means to be spiritual, which is to say, what it means to be fully human. Number 1, the capacity for reverence. And typically, reverence is associated with belief in God, but it need not be. The capacity for reverence is the sense of mystery and awe one feels about the universe and life and one's own life. Many of us have felt this sense while standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon, or in the delivery room when our child was born, or staring up at a canopy of glittering stars on a dark night, or in the eyes of someone who loves you with all of his or her heart. A sense of reverence is awareness that life is grand and wonderful beyond our imagination and comprehension. It's knowing that though I'm small and limited and finite, I'm part of something much bigger than I. Now, we UUs can be dismissive of emotion, but the capacity for reverence is primarily the ability to feel deeply. Number 2, the capacity for gratitude. Gratitude is an awareness that this awe-inspiring universe and people past and present provide us with what we need to live and flourish. Life has given us gifts that we have neither earned nor deserved. Indeed, life itself is a gift. Our parents have conceived us. Friends and family have supported us. Teachers and books have taught us. Art and music have inspired us. Plants and animals have given their lives for our nourishment. The air around us fills our lungs. The sun warms our planet. Gratitude is the capacity to recognize that none of us would be here if it were not for the contributions of someone or something else. It's a recognition, really, that we are ultimately dependent, a truth that runs counter to the American myth of the self-made person who pulls him or herself up by their own bootstraps, the rugged individualist who has gotten to where he or she is by their own brain and brawn, the self-reliant person who doesn't need anybody. Traditional religion uses the word grace, which shares the same Latin root as gratitude, to refer to God's unmerited favor. Again, we need not believe in God in order to feel grateful for life's gifts. Number 3, the capacity for stewardship. Now, in church, stewardship has become synonymous with the pledge drive, but it's a word with much richer connotations. An awareness that the universe as a whole and this planet in particular sustain us leads to a feeling of obligation to protect the earth and preserve its resources and its beauty. It also leads to a feeling of obligation to be a responsible steward for our own personal resources, our property and possessions, time and talent, body and mind, an obligation to share these gifts for the betterment of others and society as a whole, not merely for our own self-enhancement. The capacity for stewardship is the ability to see ourselves as custodians, which runs counter to capitalism's pressure to cast us as mere consumers who regard the earth as providing a limitless supply of goodies to devour, exploit, buy, and accumulate. Such a truncated view of ourselves and our planet is leading to the earth's destruction and will lead inevitably to our own. For as Chief Seattle wisely put it, the earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. All things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons and daughters of the earth. Number 4, the capacity for self-worth. Most of the universe is inanimate matter, but we have been gifted with the privilege of being alive. And whatever the duration or condition of that privilege, life is a privilege nonetheless, which makes our lives valuable and meaningful. An awareness of this privilege leads to a recognition of our dignity and worth as human beings. The capacity for self-worth is the ability to realize that even though we have shortcomings and make mistakes and have a lot of growing up to do, we are fundamentally good because life is good and we are alive. To use a biblical image, it's the capacity to hold two truths simultaneously. We are dust and we are the breath of God. This awareness of our basic goodness runs counter to the old doctrine of original sin, which holds that human beings are fundamentally defective and need a savior. Our Unitarian ancestors rightly rejected this debilitating belief. Number 5, the capacity to love. The ability to recognize our own dignity and worth is inseparably tied to our ability to recognize the dignity and worth of others, for we share our humanity. It may sound trite, but it's true. We can love others only insofar as we can love ourselves, and we can love ourselves only insofar as we're able to love others. People who cannot abide others who are greedy, for example, expose their own inability to accept their own tendencies toward greed. Or likewise, someone who is driven by perfectionism can be expected to be as judgmental of the imperfections of others as they are of their own imperfections. Love of others and self-love are really one and the same capacity. A well-developed capacity for love extends to both others and oneself what dignity and worth deserve: honesty, trustworthiness, kindness, patience, respect, generosity, and forgiveness. Number 6, the capacity for justice. A well-developed capacity for love leads to a desire for justice. Or in the words of Dr. Cornel West, justice is what love looks like in public. If you truly love others, you realize it's not enough to just give them chocolates and roses. You must give them a social system which treats them with the dignity and equality that all human beings deserve. You must give them a political system which provides them with a seat at the table of self-government, regardless of their socioeconomic status. You must give them an economic system that doesn't take necessity from the masses to give luxury to the classes. We are not individuals who live in isolation from each other. For better or worse, whether we like one another or not, we live in community. In the words of Dr. King, we are called in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. A well-developed capacity for justice takes responsibility for the human environment which forms or deforms the human beings within it. I'm always surprised and disappointed when Unitarians, of all people, ask me, what does social action have to do with spirituality? As if the two were mutually exclusive. The pursuit of justice is not the absence of spirituality. It is its fulfillment. Number 7, the capacity for creating meaning. Now, as far as we know, squirrels don't pause in the midst of gathering nuts to ask, what is the meaning and purpose of my life? The question of meaning and purpose is a distinctly human question, and it's a challenge for all of us. Some religious people may think that they're off the hook in answering this question because in their way of thinking, God has a master plan for the entire universe. But even if that were true, believers must still discern God's will for their lives. Now, whether or not you believe the universe has meaning, you must still figure out the meaning and purpose of your life. And ironically, this capacity to define meaning is not developed by asking, what is the meaning of life? It's not a question to be asked, but to be lived. The meaning of life is discovered in and through the experience of living. Now, for many people, life is made meaningful by their close relationships, particularly their family and friends. Many would agree with Henry Nouwen. There's no reason to live if there is nobody to live for. Many of us live for our work. Now, the biblical book of Genesis describes work as a curse, but for those of us who take pride in our work, who gain a sense of competency and mastery through our jobs, who feel that we're making a contribution to the lives of others, work feels more like a vocation than an occupation. Many define life's meaning through their service to the larger community, through making this world a better place than they found it. And many find meaning in savoring the gifts of life, in relishing the small pleasures that are easy to overlook. The aroma of a fresh cup of coffee, the crispness and coolness of clean sheets on the bed, the delight of a child's laughter, the orange glow of a setting sun. The more we immerse ourselves in life, the less the question of meaning matters, because the living of our life answers the question for us. And number 8, the capacity for living with mortality. We humans are not the only animals who are haunted by the awareness of our mortality. Like the question of meaning, the issue of mortality is extremely personal. It's not simply that I know that all living creatures will die. It's knowing that I will die. And that's a hard reality that most of us would rather not think about. I'm always amused by the certainty of some ministers that there is definitely life after death. Some can describe the conditions of heaven and hell as vividly as the furniture in their living room. Wouldn't it be more honest to admit what we know and what we don't know? And wouldn't it demonstrate more integrity to make only promises we know we can keep? What we do know with certainty is that there is life before death. And this one life of which we know is made all the more meaningful because of our awareness that it will end. Or as the therapist Urban Yalom succinctly put it, although the physicality of death destroys us, the idea of death saves us. Without a deadline, no pun intended, we postpone what we need to do. A deadline gives us a sense of urgency, and death, the ultimate deadline, gives our lives a sense of preciousness. I'm reminded each time a friend or acquaintance dies that we dare not fritter away this present moment, because it very well may be the only moment we have. We should savor the sweetness of the simple pleasures precisely because they do not last. We should be more fully present with others because they will not always be around. We should be more fully present with ourselves, be more authentic and less pretentious. We should put first things first, last things last. We should worry less and live more. A well-developed capacity for living in the shadow of death enables us to live as if our lives were not mere dress rehearsals. As far as we know, this is the one and only performance. Well, in my way of thinking, these are just some of the capacities that represent our spirituality. And clearly not all persons are at different points in the process of developing these capacities. Some come to see life as a gift, whereas others experience life as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, to quote Hobbes. Those whose basic needs have been satisfied in life are more likely to feel gratitude than those who have been deprived. Those who have been shamed or abused may not come to recognize their own dignity and worth or that of others. To be born with a capacity does not guarantee that the conditions of life will favor its development. Genetics, family of origin, geography, and socioeconomic status can deal us a promising or problematic hand, to say nothing of the cards we deal ourselves through our own choices in life. Another trite but true statement is that life can be unfair and unkind. The ethical challenge for all of us is to make this life fairer and kinder so that all persons can have the opportunity to realize their full capacities as human beings, to be spiritual, whether they are religious or not. Amen.